So we've seen how cities are locations for concentrated risk to a number of different risk factors, including climate change. And what I want to do in this lecture is then explore the nature of the specific vulnerabilities to climate risks in these areas of concentration. And this then provides us with a context for thinking about what the adaptation options and challenges might be for cities going forward as climate change evolves in Africa. So following our normal route of looking at vulnerability and three dimensions of vulnerability, I want to look first at exposure. And this really relates to, first of all, the geographic location of cities, which can lead to specific exposures. So many cities are located in coastal areas or along large rivers. And the reason for that is largely historical, in the sense that these both coastal areas and rivers were entry points for trade. So that's where marine and river trade would occur, and cities would develop at critical locations in those trade routes. And then secondly, coastal areas and cities as well, and rivers are useful for defense. So they would be preferential locations from a defense point of view. So coastal cities then are exposed to a specific set of climate risks. And the most important one is probably rising sea levels. If there's one thing that we can be sure of with global warming, sea levels are going to rise. And that then leads to enhanced coastal erosion, and then what we call coastal retreat. So the coastline actually moves further away, and if you have infrastructure, buildings, different parts of the city on the coast, they become threatened and eventually just fall into the sea. Also, coastal areas tend to be subject to more intense storms, because marine storms tend to be more intense and then produce what are called storm surges, so large waves that can come in and inundate areas of the coastal area where cities are located. And also winds tend to be stronger in these areas as well. So a whole combination of factors that make coastal cities particularly vulnerable. Many cities sit both on rivers and in coastal locations. So they're located where river systems flow into the ocean, either in river deltas or in estuary situations. And there you end up with a set of compound risks where you can have combination of what we call river or riverine risks and coastal risks. So you can imagine a situation where you have a flood peak coming down a river and at the same time a storm occurring offshore that produces a storm surge, and you get flooding hitting the city from both sides, both one side and the other side, that can cause much more damage than each individually. Cities also are subject to water scarcity or limits to water availability because of where they're located. So an example would be Windhoek in Namibia, the capital city, which is located in a dry area and has grown because it's a capital city, and now is in a highly water-stressed situation, particularly in dry years where there are often serious water shortages and the possibility of supply being cut off. Other cities, which maybe weren't necessarily originally located in what we'd call a water-scarce area, have become water-scarce because they've grown so much that the capacity of the local water environment to supply water to the city has been exceeded. So they kind of evolve into a water-scarce situation. In Africa, many cities are located in tropical areas or subtropical areas, and these are actually also disease hotspots, because some of the most serious diseases that affect developing countries, such as malaria and dengue and Ebola, occur in these tropical areas, and also waterborne diseases such as cholera preferentially occur in warm, wet environments. And the important thing about cities then is that their location in this area means that you're concentrating a large number of people in a disease-prone area. So if you do have a disease outbreak, then there's a rapid growth of the outbreak of the disease because of the proximity of people to each other and the possibility of rapid person-to-person infection that then leads to epidemics that can be very large in scale. So an example of that is the Ebola outbreak that happened in West Africa a couple of years ago that really led to very, very serious impacts. And the economies of countries like Liberia are still recovering from those impacts. So we've talked a bit about location, a geographical location. I want to move now on to talking about direct climatic exposure and how the climate variation across Africa then produces specific climate risks depending on where a city is located in Africa. So if you remember back to our discussion on the climate of Africa, and particularly how it affects ecosystems, we've got zones in Africa with different climatic characteristics. We've got the wet and warm tropics and subtropics that are around the equator. And then as one moves away from the equator, one moves into semi-arid and then arid areas, the deserts of the world. And then right at the tips of the continent in the north and the south, we have the Mediterranean climates where we have hot, dry summers and cool, wet winters. So each of these climatic zones brings a particular set of climatic-related risks to cities located in those areas. The tropics are characterized by heavy rainfall, which then leads to flooding, and so tropical cities are often subject to frequent and intense flooding. And also heavy rainfall can trigger landslides. So if you have cities that are located in a hilly environment, you can frequently get landslides that both remove any homes and infrastructure that are actually on the hill slope, but also cover up and destroy property and infrastructure that's at the bottom of the hill as well. So we've seen examples of that quite recently where landslides have caused serious damage in developing country urban areas. Also in the tropics, they tend to be associated with high humidity, which then leads to, coupled with temperature, heat and thermal stress. So one gets much more stressed by heat if it's humid than if it's dry. And so heat waves in tropical areas can produce quite serious health impacts. In the drier parts of Africa, so the subtropics and the deserts, the critical factors affecting cities there are, climatic factors are drought, so year-to-year variations in rainfall in an area that's already relatively dry. And so that can lead to severe water shortages and scarcity, but also regional food insecurity, which then propagates through into food insecurity in the city itself. And then also just the direct effects of heat stress. So if your average temperature is 35 degrees centigrade, for instance, then when you do have those heat waves, you're talking about temperatures in the 40s that are actually take humans outside of their tolerance levels and can lead to epidemics, if you like, of premature death because of heat stress. The final climate-related exposure that's geographically constrained or controlled relates to tropical cyclone risk. And this mostly affects Southeast Africa, so from generally the coastal and near interior regions of northern South Africa, but especially Mozambique and Madagascar, and then also parts of southern Tanzania. And these are tropical cyclone prone areas where intense and widespread damage can occur, and so there's a particular sensitivity to these tropical storms in those areas.